world's lakes and flowing rivers constitute just 1% of the planet's water. The fresh water in rivers is vital to all land-based life, but population pressures are putting major waterways under stress. Rivers provide drinking water and water for agricultural purposes, and since the beginnings of human civilization, rivers have been used for transport, and cities have grown on their banks. Rivers are an integral part of the water cycle, where fresh water, falling as rain or snow, flows to the oceans to be evaporated by warmth from the sun, forming clouds which release rain. All plant and animal life depends on this cycle. Africa's River Nile is the longest river in the world. Since ancient times, the Nile has been a lifeline for the people and animals along its 6,800-kilometre length. 10 countries share the Nile, but the Nile Water Agreement of 1929 granted Egypt the lion's share of the Nile's waters. The treaty was signed when 67-year-old Barnabas Okwach's parents were children. His one-acre farm near Kenya's Lake Victoria has been in the family for generations. He is the only one in his area that defies the water treaty and irrigates his land. The treaty has been criticised by East African countries as a colonial relic that impedes development in upstream countries. Okwach says the treaty is stopping him from expanding his farm. Lake Victoria is the source of the White Nile, the longest branch of the Nile. It's the world's largest tropical lake and is an important transport hub for Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya. Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, the Congo, Sudan and Egypt all rely on the Nile for agriculture. The Egyptian capital, Cairo, sits on the banks of the Nile, and because of the treaty, it can veto any upstream irrigation plans that could threaten the Nile's levels. Over 95% of Egypt's water comes from the river, and most Egyptians live in the fertile Nile Valley, though it makes up only 4% of Egypt's available land. The country's population is growing, so Egypt's need for water will continue to increase. But many of the sub-Saharan countries have been pushing for what they say would be a fairer use of the Nile's waters. The fair sharing of the waters from international waterways is a growing issue around the world. The fact that Egypt, at the end of the Nile, has so much control has more to do with international politics in the early 20th century when the treaty was drafted. Every year the Nile floods, bringing with it replenishing nutrients that act as a natural fertilizer. In 2004, an international expedition set off to navigate the White Nile from source to sea for the first time in history. The 5-person team, sponsored by Care International, are from Ireland, New Zealand and South Africa. In some places, the Settle the Nile expedition needed help from the local people to carry their specially constructed rafts around difficult stretches of the upper river. They started from Bujagali Falls in Jinja, Uganda, to follow the river from Lake Victoria through Sudan and finally to Egypt and the Mediterranean. After some particularly turbulent stretches of the Nile in Uganda's Murchison Falls National Park, the team took time out to ponder the dangers ahead. One of the biggest problems in this part of the Nile were the hippos and elephants that enjoy bathing in the river. Wherever the crews stopped, they drew crowds of curious onlookers. One reason for the expedition was to promote harmony amongst the people of the Nile. The team was equipped with 2 5-metre self-bailing inflatable rafts. As the Nile broadened and slowed, the rafters had to start paddling. 2 previous expeditions, using collapsible canoes, were forced to carry their craft for large parts of the journey. 4 months later, after coming through deserts, through war zones and jungles, the 2 craft were motoring through the Nile's biggest city, Cairo. Great explorers of the 19th century had struggled to map the world's longest river. Their rigid wooden boats could not cope with the turbulent waters of the upper White Nile. At other places, the river disappears into broad marshlands. The Settle the Nile expedition had come through about 40 sets of particularly treacherous rapids, at one stage losing a paddle to the jaws of a crocodile. All 6 team members had been living in East Africa for at least 5 years. Between them, they could boast an incredible 50 years of white water and expedition experience. Soon after the Nile passes through the Egyptian capital, it breaks into distributaries that fan out through its rich delta region. The group would emerge into the Mediterranean at Rosetta, the city that gave its name to the Rosetta Stone that led to the deciphering of hieroglyphics. The Nile is unusual in that its last tributary, the Atbara, joins it halfway along its length in the Sudan. With no more feeder rivers, the Nile at Cairo is actually a smaller river than it is in the Sudan. Herodotus described Egypt as the gift of the Nile. Because of this great river, the early inhabitants of Egypt were able to settle and establish a wheat-based agriculture that led to the development of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Despite 8,000 years of human activity on its banks, the Settle the Nile expedition was the first to navigate the Nile's entire length. Since the Roman Empire, people had been seeking the headwaters of the Nile, but until the 19th century, expeditions had been unable to penetrate the Sud marshlands in the Sudan. After a brief stay in Cairo, the rafters finished the last 200-kilometre stretch to Rosetta and the Mediterranean in around 10 days. Their complete voyage along the Nile had taken 18 weeks. A film about their journey, called The Longest River, was released the following year. The world's weather patterns are changing, and nowhere is this more obvious than in the great rivers. Though seasonal variations have always led to floods, long-established records are being broken and then broken again. Across Europe, once-in-a-century extremes are now being repeated every 5 years, and high ground, previously beyond established high water marks, is no longer safe. But while some communities are struggling to come to terms with more water, other areas are experiencing unprecedented drought. Just 2 years ago, the worst drought in more than 100 years was damaging the world's biggest rainforest. South America's Amazon basin was drying out. In Manaus, capital of Brazil's state of Amazonas, dozens of boats lay stranded in the cracked dirt of the riverbank after the water levels receded. Pontoons and floating docks sat exposed on dry land. An hour from where it joins the Rio Negro to form the Amazon River, the Rio Solimões was so low that kilometres of exposed riverbank turned into dunes as winds whipped up thick sandstorms. Climatologists said the drought was the result of warmer ocean temperatures, but many were blaming the heavy logging across the Amazon basin. Another major Amazon tributary, the Rio Madeira, was so dry that cargo ships could not reach Porto Velho, the capital of Rondônia state. Instead, fuel used to run power plants had to be hauled in by truck from southern Brazil. The rainforest became susceptible to fires. Nearby, the Parana to Manakiri rivers' dry banks were littered with thousands of rotting fish. Where water remained in stagnant pools, scores of piranhas shook in spasms in what was left of the once fast-flowing Amazon tributary. In Manaus, more than 1,600 kilometres from the sea, both the Amazon and Rio Negro are usually more than 8 kilometres wide and 300 metres deep. And although these river levels drop towards the end of the dry season, local people had never seen anything like this. The drought also upset daily life in communities scattered throughout the basin's labyrinth of waterways. The governor of Amazonas declared 16 municipalities in crisis as the drought stranded river dwellers who could not buy or sell food. The Amazon basin is the largest drainage basin in the world, and although the Nile is the longest, the Amazon is the biggest river, responsible for 1/5 of the world's freshwater outflow. As such, it is the single most important freshwater system in the world, and changes here will have an impact on the world's weather patterns. But it's not just the Amazon that has been suffering. In Southeast Asia, the Mekong is also experiencing reduced flows. Chinese dams and drought are being blamed for the record lows, threatening the livelihoods of millions in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam. Along the dried-up riverbanks in Thailand's Mukdahan province, 600 kilometres north of Bangkok, local fishermen wade through the shallow waters, their fishing boats left unused. With water at its lowest level in living memory, fishermen say their hauls are just 30% of what used to be normal. According to the Mekong River Commission, a joint Lao, Cambodian, Thai and Vietnamese body set up to oversee the health of the 4,000-kilometre waterway, the river is flowing close to rock bottom. Parts of the Mekong have become treacherous for cargo boats, with sandbanks up to 3 kilometres long emerging from the waters along the river's lower stretches. The Mekong is the heart and soul of mainland Southeast Asia. Over 60 million people depend on the Mekong and its tributaries for food, water and transport. Continued low water levels could be the end for fish such as the critically endangered giant Mekong catfish, the world's largest freshwater fish, and one of the roughly 1,500 different species unique to the Southeast Asian river system. Low rainfall is partly to blame for the low water levels, as is increasing demand by growing agricultural populations along the river. But Chinese dam building is thought by many to be connected to the drought. Critics say it is no coincidence that the worst drought in previous years was in 1993, the time of the completion and filling of China's first major dam in the southwest province of Yunnan. China has since completed another dam and has plans for 6 more, all of which are likely to have implications for the people living in the Mekong basin. Environmentalists say the Mekong could soon be the world's most dammed river, with more than 100 major dams, diversions and irrigation schemes planned, and thousands of smaller projects already in place. China's Yangtze is the world's 3rd largest river. With more than 1/5 of the world's population, yet only 8% of the planet's fresh water, China has a water problem. Now, a water redistribution plan, known as the South to North Water Diversion Project, is under construction. Due for completion in 2050, the scheme will link China's 4 main rivers. With 3 diversion routes, stretching south to north across the eastern, central and western parts of the country, it will be the largest project of its kind ever undertaken. Today, pollution runs a close second to drought for causing water shortages in China. Dirty Yangtze River water has left the south hard-pressed to take care of its own needs, let alone the 200 million peasants tilling the arid north. A series of droughts in the north has led officials to novel measures. Silver iodide crystals are used to coax rain from overcast skies. But cloud seeding may not be enough to fill the north's water needs before the major north-south project comes online. China's huge population and its need for water are also causing problems for animals native to its rivers. The long-beaked bargee, a freshwater dolphin unique to the Yangtze, is possibly extinct. A recent search along the length of the river failed to find any of the mammals. In the late 1970s, scientists believed there to be several hundred budgie still living in the river. The budgie is related to other freshwater species found in Asia's Mekong, Indus and Ganges rivers, all of them highly endangered or already extinct. A 1997 survey confirmed that just 13 budgie survived, while the last verified sighting was in 2004. Despite the recent systematic search of the Yangtze, no freshwater dolphin was seen.
Yeah, I've got him. Looks like
The last budgie in captivity, Chi-Chi, died in 2002. The Chinese government had set up a breeding reserve in a lake in central Hubei province to look after captured budgie, but failed to find any dolphins in the wild. Further south, the Pearl River Delta dolphin is also threatened. Toxic industrial waste, overfishing and massive infrastructure development appear to be stacking the odds against their survival. This population, from a reserve in the waters around Hong Kong, are being brought in for a medical check. Also known as the Irrawaddy dolphin, the species is actually a coastal dolphin that ventures well into the rivers of Southeast Asia, India and the Philippines. Organochlorines, including the pesticide DDT, which is still used in China, have been found in dolphin tissue samples at alarmingly high concentrations and are destroying the mammals' immune systems and killing off their young. The dolphins also face other threats, including heavy boat traffic. In Britain, the River Thames, which flows through the nation's capital, is seeing one of its inhabitants making a dramatic recovery. The otter, once on the brink of extinction in England, is increasing in numbers due to a program aimed at cleaning up the river's waters. Since a low point around 1980, otter sightings have increased by around 300%. But experts say there is still more to do in making areas of the Thames appropriate for the otters to use as nesting sites. It's not just the return of the otter that has local people excited. Such species are a barometer of the health of the river environment. So important are rivers to human society that around the world, festivals are dedicated to the great rivers that bring life and fertility. In Cambodia, the annual water festival in Phnom Penh coincides with the full moon of the 12th lunar month. The festival recalls Cambodia's military victories on the water, with the highlight being a boat race in which hundreds of vessels race against each other on the Mekong River. At the start of the festival, gaily decorated boats with oarsmen in matching uniforms parade before the royal palace, so crowds can get a close view of their team before the race begins. The boat racing dates back to ancient times, marking the strength of the powerful Khmer marine forces during the Khmer Empire. This year, more than 400 of the brightly coloured boats, with over 2,500 paddlers, battled it out for top honours. During the day, the boats race in pairs over a roughly 1 kilometre stretch of the river. The festival also pays homage to the Mekong River for providing the country with fertile land and abundant fish. People come to the capital from every corner of Cambodia. Crowds of hundreds of thousands are attracted to the celebrations. The boats each have around 70 paddlers, and at full speed, they are an impressive sight. The Water Festival is truly a national event. People across the country have spent almost a full year preparing their village's boat. Cambodian King Norodom Sihamoni attends the races and was on hand in the evening to light a ceremonial float as fireworks lit the sky. The Water Festival also coincides with the full moon of the Buddhist calendar month of Kadiok. For Cambodians, the full moon is a good omen, which promises a bountiful harvest. In neighbouring Thailand, the water festival is also practiced. At lakes and rivers across the country, people gather in the evening to celebrate with thousands of flickering candles set afloat to help dreams come true and carry away misfortune. In Bangkok, the traditional Loi Krathong kicked off with people from all walks of life carrying their lotus-shaped vessels to nearby rivers. Loi means to float, and a krathong is a lotus-shaped vessel usually made from banana leaves, containing flowers, a candle and 3 joss sticks. Some people cut their nails and hair and then put them in the krathong as well as some coins before launching them. A mixture of tradition and religion, the festival has been cultivated over the years, attracting Thais from across the country and foreigners alike. Loi Krathong is among the most popular festivals in Thailand, celebrated annually after the rainy season on the full moon of November. The world's biggest religious festival is centred around India's sacred river Ganges. Thousands of Hindu holy men brandishing tridents made their way to the Ganges to bathe on what was judged as the most auspicious day of the 6-week Ardh Kumbh Mela. Tens of millions of pilgrims gather for the ancient festival to wash away their sins and free themselves from the earthly cycle of reincarnation. The observance of Kumbh Mela is believed to have started thousands of years ago, in the Vedic period. Other activities include religious debate, devotional chanting, and mass feeding of holy men and women. Sadhus from across India gathered well before dawn in Allahabad at the confluence of the Ganges, the Yamuna, and a mythical third river, the Sarasvati, to bathe and speed their way to the attainment of nirvana. Thousands fought for space on the crowded, sloping riverbanks, many filling metal pots with the sacred water to take home for ill or dying relatives. Crowds at the Ardh Kumbh Mela were expected to top 5 million. The festival is held roughly every 3 years in one of 4 sites, with the Maha Kumbh Mela held every 12 years in Allahabad. The last gathering in 2001 drew some 50 to 70 million pilgrims.